And I have press kits for you that you can access later that has all the contact information as well. As we begin, I'd like to introduce some of the people that are in our organization. Starting on this side, Emil Graziani is one of our board members, former executive director of Garten Industries. Nassim Raqqa, who you know as an award-winning author and a journalist, is on our advisory committee. Catherine Ginsberg, she's a criminologist from Portland. Tom O'Connor, former head of religious services at OSP for the Department of Corrections. Jeff Ellis, who's our legal guy, heads up the Oregon Capital Services. You'll be hearing from him later. And with us also is Representative Karen Yarborough from Illinois, who led the legislation and championed the repeal in that state just a couple of months ago. So I want to start off. Thank you very much. We'll let Karen start. I want to introduce, you can come back up there in a minute. I want to introduce Karen Yarborough. As I said, she was the champion. She's been working on repeal in Illinois for quite some time. She will make a statement and then be available for questioning afterward. We're happy to have her here. Last night she spoke at an event in Portland that was very successful, and we're happy to share it with the media today. Karen.
Thank you, Ron, and thank all of you for being here. I'm State Representative Karen Yarborough. I serve as Assistant Majority Leader in the Illinois House, and I had the honor and the pleasure to be the Chief House Sponsor of the abolition bill. You know, the last election, as I think of it, last year, if it taught us anything all across this country, is that voters want us to take and stop playing politics on every issue and take action. That's what they want us to do, a job. The time for action and abolishing the death penalty is now. I want to thank all the advocates. I've met many of them here. I've met people from all across the country when they descended on Chicago, Illinois, and encouraged our efforts there. The coalition is a broad coalition of people, with family members of death penalty inmates to clergy to regular citizens who see an opportunity for all to take a stand and set an example for what is right. Now let me tell you about Illinois. Since 2000, we've had a moratorium on executions. This was started by a Republican governor and continued by Democratic governors. This bipartisan recognition that Illinois' death penalty was flawed wasn't enough for us. We did better by abolishing and ending capital punishment in Illinois for good. This movement for abolition of the death penalty is by no means a movement towards amnesty for the guilty. Though everybody agrees that those wrongfully accused and convicted should be freed, we're all interested in justice. It's my personal opinion that criminals who are death penalty eligible should be instead given life in prison with no chance of parole. This, I believe, is a more harsher sentence and a more just penalty. Moreover, and thankfully, Illinois has an Innocence Project. Those people have worked tirelessly on trying to get to truth, and they've been successful. And let me suggest here and now that this state needs an Innocence Project. And whoever and however that gets started in this state, it needs to start today, the conversation. I want to talk just one moment about the cost to taxpayers. Death penalty cases are so much more expensive than non-death cases. In fiscal year 2008 in Illinois, we allocated more than $16 million to the Capital Litigation Trust Fund. And since 2003, despite the moratorium, remember, we had a moratorium on the death penalty. The taxpayers in the state of Illinois spent more than $100 million on death penalty defense. Think of all the good that we could have done in Illinois with that money. There are crime prevention programs that are effective and do a good job. But we simply don't have the money and don't have the budget to undergird those. We want to reduce crime, and if the death penalty is not doing it, and it is not, we need to end it. We want to focus on ending poverty and the growing sense of desperation that causes so many to turn to crime and violence. Now, I know this is not an easy project. It was not easy for Illinois, and it won't be easy here, but it needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. And the people in the state need to get serious and say, look at the facts. They're there for you. Illinois is the 16th state. It needs to be joined by the 17th state, and I hope that the 17th state is the state of Oregon. The death penalty is not a deterrent. It does not reduce crime. It's terribly expensive to taxpayers, and in my opinion, it is not the harshest crime that you can give to a person. I hope that you will stand with me and take the steps towards ending state-sponsored homicide in this state. Thank you.
In this county, we've had a couple of, or actually three people sentenced to death in the last year, and part of the punishment that the prosecutors were saying was that this puts them in like a different part of the population, like it puts them, they're separate, it's like solitary confinement for them, and that if they were with the general population, that they could teach other people in there, that part of the punishment was for them to be in that separate death row. And juries, went for that.
Are you saying because they're isolated?
Yeah,
having them isolated, and what's the point?
That putting them on death row, it's a harsher punishment because
they're isolated,
and they also can't teach other criminals that are getting. They're not in the general population where they can walk around and talk to people. And
well, I don't know that I agree with that. I mean, if you're in general population now, for people who do certain types of crimes, in general population is a death sentence in itself. I mean, people who kill children or rape children or that kind of thing. So if you're in general population, you could have some real problems. I understand the isolation. They're in isolation and they have to live with themselves. So then the point becomes, okay, if that is a punishment, them to be in isolation, continue that punishment for the rest of their lives. It would be better to do that than to have those to kill those people. Because as I mentioned, you don't have an innocence project in this state, and we've had some mighty good lawyers that have proven cases that people are innocent. You don't know in this state. You don't know.
Was there a public vote in Illinois on repeal?
No. And it's my understanding in this state that you would have to go to more or less a referendum and the people would choose. We go through the General Assembly. So we've had 2 votes. Now, each person in my chamber, there are 118 state representatives. We represent 105,000 people. And we had a vote in the House, we had a vote in the Senate, and then the governor signed the bill and made the bill law. So it went through the General Assembly process, and that bill actually will become law on July 1st.
What were the signs you saw that people were ready to accept this, that Illinois was ready to go this way?
I did not come to the process with my mind made up that this was the right thing to do. This happened for me over 11 years ago when I started hearing some of the arguments on how it just simply does not work. So there have been people working on this for years. I stand on the shoulders of those who incrementally move this process along. There are things that happen. I mean, having 20 people on death row who were innocent gave pause to then Governor George Ryan to decide that, hey, there's something wrong here. And he appointed a commission, and the commission came back with 85 reforms. Now, I've talked to a number of people who were on that committee, and one in particular, Scott Turow, he's a world-famous author, and he said to me, he says, I will just tell you that while we've come up with these 85 reforms, that even if we employed all 85 of them, there's a possibility that we could get it wrong. These are human beings that are coming up with this, and when human beings, we're all fallible, we make mistakes, but we shouldn't be making mistakes when it comes to people's lives. So we've been through a process, and we got to our tipping point. We called the bill has now law.
But for victims, they want to have a lot of them want to have the death penalty, so it's a closure for them.
A part of our coalition were people who had, lost loved ones to violent deaths, and they are murder victim families that work with us every single day that we advocated on behalf of this bill. We listened to those voices. Before the governor signed the bill, he spoke to people from all over Illinois who were murder victims' families. He was sensitive to that. I was sensitive to that. Senator Kwame Raoul, who carried the bill in the Senate, he was sensitive to their voices. What they told us was, for the death penalty to be effective, it needs to be swift and sure. It is neither. They're in and out of court, appeals, and the process gets drug out over a very long time. There's no closure there. And I've listened to so many people, murder victims' families, wives, husbands, whomever they were, and I've heard them say things like, I thought that when they killed him that I would feel some relief. I did not feel that relief. So there really isn't any closure. How do you have closure for someone that you love? You're never going to have real closure there. But if you know that that person is behind bars, and you know they're going to rot there and be there forever, you can move on with your life. You know where they are, but you don't have on your conscience the fact that your state or you were so hardwired for a death that this person is dead as a result of what they did, but you are really a part of that process. I don't think, and I've talked to so many people, on this issue over the years. Nobody wants to participate in doing this. Judges don't want to. People, even the doctors, they take an oath to do no harm, but yet they want them to administer, the lethal injection. I would venture to say that probably the people in this room would not want to. If your family member, God forbid, was killed, you're going to have some emotional thoughts and feelings about that. We're human. That's what we do. But now, what's the right course of action? A death for a death? Sure, all of us know the Bible verse of an eye for an eye, but is that the right way? And is it the just way? And what if it's not the person?
What persuaded the other legislators and presumably their constituents as well that repealing the death penalty was what they want to do?
There were a number of different reasons, and it depends on, I'm sure, if we went around this room here today, there would be different reasons for different people. People are motivated differently. For some, it's the moral issue. I mean, you just should not kill people. For some, there was a cost issue. We shouldn't be spending the state's money, taxpayers' money, this way. For some, it was the issue of what if the person isn't guilty. So it depended upon the legislator. And as I lobbied people, and our coalition, we had a broad-based coalition of people that were made up of people that run the gamut. So if it were somebody, a Catholic person, we would send a Catholic conference to talk to those folks. And, the moral argument, thou shalt not kill. And for the most part, that would be the reason for those people. So it depended upon who you were speaking to. And it was important as a legislator for me to really listen to what my colleagues were saying to me when I went to them if they weren't there.
I'm not aware of anybody on Oregon's death row asserting innocence. Given that, why should we go with an innocence project?
Maybe you don't know whether, I don't know about the people who are on your death row, but there's certainly people who have been accused of crimes that maybe have not committed them. Our Innocence Project has worked very well, and some people are just resigned to their fate. They just figure they're not going to have a chance at all, and if they don't have any money and they're poor, or if they're of mental capacity, they can't make good judgments, they're going to just, kind of fall by the wayside. So for those who say that they are innocent, there should be something there for them. This project has worked very well in Illinois, and quite frankly, I'm very proud of the work that they've done. I'm sure if you had one, you'd find out exactly what you have.
Were there, did anybody in Illinois pay a political price? Were there lawmakers who feel that they lost their seat, or any discernible political price for the repeal there?
That's a hard question to answer. I think that first of all, we just did redistricting, so people are going to have new districts. So they'll probably find out who these new people are in their districts. I think that maybe some folks, because we have not had an election yet. This bill was just passed in January, so we haven't had an election yet. I think that people made those decisions based on what they thought, whether they would have a problem back home. There are some legislators that did polling, though, to see what their constituents felt about this issue. So I'm sure there was some political concern for some folks who came from really conservative districts. But this was a bipartisan bill. I mean, we had 7 Republicans who were on the bill, who supported the bill. And all the way through the process, we had Republican support, actually as co-sponsors, who really felt like this was the right thing for Illinois to do.
In the case of the Gary Haugen, the person who's scheduled for execution here, he has said that he wants this punishment. Does that make it different? I mean, is it still inappropriate to execute somebody who says that that's the punishment that he desires?
Jack Kevorkian just died too, didn't he? And there's some people who feel like Jack did a good service for the people who wanted his service, but it wasn't quite legal. And I don't know if it's illegal in this state or not. I don't know. I don't know where it's legal to do that. But I think the gentleman that you're talking about now probably is tired. I mean, he's been through a very long, protracted process, and I've not been in any of these people's shoes to know what they think or feel. I know I have one person in my office right now, all she does is answer prisoner letters. As the chairman of Appropriation Public Safety, I oversee the budget for corrections, and so I interact with the Department of Corrections on a regular basis. And there are a number of things that happen there that are atrocities. It's not a very nice place to be. And you would think that people wouldn't want to go there, so they wouldn't do the things that they do to just go there and be incarcerated. But yet, we've got a 57% recidivism rate. I forgot the number of prisoners that we have in the state of Illinois. I know we have 27 prisons and another 17 work camps for kids. Something we're doing is not working. Our system is, now that's a system that's broken, the criminal justice system. And whatever I can do, and there are things that I can do and that I'm working towards, it's going to need money to do some of those things. But if we're using the money for a capital system that's going to take away those valuable resources, we won't be able to get there. There are a number of folks who are in prison who have drug crimes. I mean, these are nonviolent crimes. And we're spending somewhere between $27,000 and $33,000 a year. That's a terrible waste of money. Sorry about my long answers.
Was
Do you
there
have trouble convincing your constituency in the Broadview area that this was the right thing for them to do, for their representative to do?
Not at all. They were proud of me taking on this important issue. It's not issue that everybody would want to take on. But the people in my district are very pleased. I get emails, letters, calls. They were very happy that their representative stood up with and against all of what I had to deal with. They were proud.
That pride may manifest itself differently in other districts in the state of Illinois. The first election after this
and we'll see.
death penalty change.
Yes, and we'll see. I mean, we did a number of things in Illinois this year that probably moved us a little further to the left, but then we moved, to the middle on some other issues. This was the right time. It was the right thing to do, and I'm happy that I got an opportunity to do it. When you can do something where life is in the balance, the right thing to do is what we've done in Illinois.
I guess I'm still trying to get to that right time issue. Like, what provided the urgency to get this done now versus years ago or versus years from now?
I'm sure that the legislators who carried it 20 years ago would have liked to have gotten it done then. But like everything else, sometimes an issue takes time, and it's the right time, the right set of legislators, the climate, the mood of the legislature. There are a number of factors that go into play when you figure out, and we just decided now is the time.
Why not put it to a public vote?
We didn't have to. Our process in Illinois is to go through the General Assembly. Your process in this state is to do it. You've got a couple of ways. I guess you can gather signatures and you can have a referendum. So we chose a process that would work in our state.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Karen.
Thank you.
Your wonderful and complete answers.
Thank you.
Again, I have press kits for you people from the media, and in that is a fuller statement that I'm going to read now. But I would like to get it on the record with you people, some information about OADP and what we are and what we are not. Oregonians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty is a nonprofit 501c3 volunteer organization. Our organization has experienced great growth in the last 12 months as the wave of abolition moves across the country. That growth is part of the progressive activity here as well. The number of individuals who are supporting our dramatic efforts have increased in the last 12 months. The number of organizations supporting our work, both faith communities and secular organizations, have increased to 50. Included in such in this group are people like Oregon's League of Women Voters, Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, Physicians for Social Responsibility, the Oregon chapter of the National Association of Social Workers, Oregon's PeaceWorks, the Salem Kaiser, and the Portland chapter of the NAACP, both the Oregon Commission on Black Affairs, the Oregon Commission on Hispanic Affairs, along with most of the major Christian denominations, the Jewish community, and other faith communities and secular organizations concerned about a more peaceful Oregon. We have a board of directors that is made up of Oregonians, each with particular experience in repeal work, criminal justice organizations, along with a murder victim family member. In addition to our board of directors, we also have an advisory council made up of 70 members, each all dedicated to the same thing. The lawyers, former prosecutors, former employees of the Oregon Department of Corrections, social workers, academics, business people, and legislators. Oregon is one of 34 states to still have a death penalty. In most states, the law can be repealed by the legislatures. That can't be done here. We have to get it on the ballot and then get it voted by the people. There are lots of reasons to seek repeal. It is a flawed system, an expensive system, and as we travel this journey of our focus, we are going to appeal. We have been jerked away from that attention by the Haugen case, and we are appealing to the governor to halt that case, do what is within his power. OADP is for justice. OADP is not soft on crime. OADP does not coddle criminals and violent perpetrators. Life without parole is on the books. Life with after 30 years release is also on the books. We have alternatives. We are going to try and halt the execution, look at this, and educate the people as we move through this journey. The next thing that we're going to talk, any questions about that?
Have you submitted a formal request to the governor to?
Not a formal request. We are in conversation with people on his staff. Many of our supporters have contacted him. Many of us individually have contacted him, but you will hear in a couple of minutes about a formal legal maneuver. Other questions you might have about our organization? Okay, the third subject, I'd like to introduce Jeff Ellis. He's the head of Oregon Capital Services, and he will tell you about the legal action that we are proposing now. Jeff is a member of our board of directors.
Good morning. My name is Jeffrey Ellis. I am the director of the Oregon Capital Resource Center. Next Monday, we expect to file a petition for writ of mandamus in the Oregon Supreme Court, asking the Oregon Supreme Court to vacate the death warrant in Mr. Haugen's case and to send the case back to Marion County to conduct a competency hearing. The reason that we are doing so is this. When Mr. Haugen appeared at the death warrant hearing, he was represented by counsel, and counsel presented a statement by the only mental health professional who has evaluated Mr. Haugen recently to determine if he were competent to be executed. That mental health professional, a neuropsychologist, said that he was incompetent, that he was delusional. At the hearing, the court allowed Mr. Haugen to discharge counsel and strike that information from the record. The law is quite clear that when a defendant's competence is put into issue, he cannot be allowed to discharge counsel, and the court cannot ignore the evidence of incompetence. And that is exactly what happened here. The trial court, the Marion County Court, did not follow the law. It instead ignored the law, ignored the facts, and allowed the death warrant to be signed. And we will ask the Oregon Supreme Court to reverse that and to demand that the Marion County Court follow the law, follow the Constitution, and conduct an appropriate hearing.
You said trial court. Was that in fact the trial court?
It was the trial court in the sense that it was Judge Gamond, who's a Marion County Circuit Court judge, and he actually did try Mr. Haugen's case.
I'm not going to say this correctly because I don't know what the legal terms are exactly, but I guess my question is, do you have standing to do this? Will the Supreme Court even consider the request, since you aren't Gary Haugen himself, or presumably don't have a relative of his on your...
I am not doing this on behalf of Mr. Haugen. I am doing this to protect Mr. Haugen's rights, and there are many cases that say when a defendant is incompetent and unable to exercise those sorts of decisions, a lawyer not only has a right, but a duty to ensure that the integrity of the judicial system remains intact. Because what is about to happen is the only evidence of Mr. Haugen's incompetence, the only evidence on the subject matter, has been ignored and stricken from the record. And case law is quite clear that the Constitution requires a meaningful hearing. This has happened time and time again. Most recently, it happened in the state of Texas, where the state of Texas tried to kill an individual by the name of Panetti, and did so without any hearing. And the United States Supreme Court, in a case called Panetti versus Quartermain, said you can't do it that way. There needs to be some process that precedes an execution. When there is a claim of incompetence and when it is supported by evidence, there must be a hearing. You cannot do what happened in Marion County, which is that the evidence was ignored and the lawyers who were prepared to present that evidence were discharged and told that they could no longer work on the case.
And there was an actual, her testimony, or the information they had was that she had found him to be incompetent, not that she needed further analysis in order to make that determination?
There were two pieces of evidence before the court from mental health professionals. One was a determination that Mr. Haugen was incompetent to be executed because he suffered from delusional beliefs. The second piece of information was a declaration from an expert in fetal alcohol syndrome who said, I would like to work on this case because the information that's been presented to me suggests that it's important to investigate that, and if he in fact does have fetal alcohol syndrome, that could also be relevant to whether he's competent to be executed. But that piece of evidence, like the other piece of evidence, was ignored and stricken from the record.
Were both of those from Dr. Lezak?
Dr. Lezak presented a declaration that said he was incompetent. Natalie Novick-Brown, who's a psychologist and who is dedicated to working on fetal alcohol syndrome cases, also presented a declaration saying that she would be interested and willing to work on the case, and that if in fact Mr. Haugen suffers from fetal alcohol syndrome, that might as well be relevant to his competence to be executed.
So you're alleging that he was incompetent to waive his appeals, fire his counsel, or both?
We're really not alleging that. What we're alleging is that a hearing has to happen to determine whether he's competent or not. The state has every right to present evidence at that hearing. It may well be that Mr. Haugen has a right to present evidence at that hearing as well. But what happened in this case is the court subverted the adversarial system and ignored the facts and pushed them to the side and didn't follow the law. And what we're saying is that the process is important, that you have to go through a process before you can execute someone. And the process didn't happen. And unfortunately, this is what happens in capital cases. This is what happens in cases where individuals volunteers. The courts push the law to the side. The courts ban the Constitution from the courtroom. And that's what happened in this case. And all we are asking is that the law be followed. Thank you.
I have one last announcement. In terms of advocacy, and I'd mentioned earlier about the wave of abolition across the country, giving merit to that process, there have been a lot of people, including former Supreme Court justices, that say that the death penalty laws don't work and we need to get rid of them. Recently, Jeannie Woodward, who was the warden at San Quentin Prison, has the largest death penalty or death row in the country. When she retired, she spoke out immediately against the death penalty. She has joined Death Penalty Focus in California as our executive director. And last night in Portland at our event, we had an endorsement from Mr. Frank Thompson, former superintendent of OSP, where death row is and where the execution chamber is. If you're not familiar with Mr. Thompson, he was a superintendent when we had our last two executions in 1996 and 1997. And he, like the governor, anguished over those decisions, but as a loyal employee, he fulfilled that responsibility, but he didn't like a minute of it. Last night in Portland, he stood up in front of a large group of people at the St. Mary's Cathedral and declared his opposition publicly. He is retired, publicly declared his opposition, and he will be working for repeal in Oregon. Any other questions? Thank you for being here. I have these press kits that have a lot of background information.